Hello everyone. Today we'll be doing the 2018 AP Computer Science A Free Response 4. You can find these free responses after they were released by the College Board just by Googling them, and you'll get to this page. You can click on this after you've scrolled down and you can find this document. So question 4 is probably the hardest free response on this test, and let's break it down. So this question involves reasoning about arrays of integers. You'll write two static methods, both of which are in a class named ArrayTester. So here we've got the ArrayTester class, and one of these methods is getColumn, and then we've got hasAllValues, which it doesn't look like we're going to write, contains duplicates, also not going to write, and isLatin, which we are going to write. So let's take a look at part A. Write a static method getColumn which returns a one-dimensional array containing the elements of a single column in a two-dimensional array, and we need them to be in the same order. So here is one example. We've got this two-dimensional array. It's kind of like a matrix, and so when we put these two inputs in, we should get this array returned. So let's write that. Public static int array get column int 2D array arr 2D and int c. So int c is going to be representing the column index that we want. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create an array which will hold the output column that we want. So int array result equals new int, and how big do we want it to be? Well, if we think about it, the length of this column is going to be the number of rows in the original 2D array, because one column is 1, 2, 3, 4, the number of rows. So we want arr2d dot length, which gives us that number of rows. Okay, next. So we've got to find a way that we can get all of these, we can iterate through this and get all of the values correctly. So we're going to use a loop. So we're going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than arr2d dot length, so that means we're iterating through the rows, and I plus plus. Now if you're going to iterate through every single value in this, you'd need a nested loop. But since we're only iterating through each row, we don't need more than one loop. So what we're going to say is result I equals, well, we're going to go to arr2d, and we're going to access, well, what row do we want? Well, we want row I. And what column do we want? Well, we want column C. Okay. That's all that there is for result. And so we're going to loop through some 2D array and add each correct value into that array, and then we're going to return it. So return result. And that's all there is for part A. So part B. This is probably the harder part. Write the static method isLatin, which returns true if a given two-dimensional square array is a Latin square, and otherwise returns false. So it's going to be a Boolean method. So a two-dimensional square array of integers is a Latin square if the following conditions are true. So this Latin square must have no duplicate values in the first row, and all values in the first row of the square must appear in each row of the square, and all values in the first row of the square must appear in each column of the square. So there's three things we need to check for. So we can look here and say, okay, row 1 doesn't have any duplicate values, and these values in this first row also appear here, and they appear in here, here, and here. That's all. So this is not a Latin square because we've got duplicate elements here and here, and then we've got other stuff because for other reasons. Yeah. So now we can look at this and it says we're provided two helper methods, contains duplicates and has all values. So we don't actually need to write methods for whether this has any duplicates or whether this has all the values. We just need to use these methods and assume that they work. The method contains duplicates returns true if the given one-dimensional array arr contains any duplicate values and false otherwise. Method has all values returns true if and only if every value in arr1 appears in arr2. So here we can see all of those. And here we've got to complete method is Latin below, and we've got to assume that get column works regardless of what you wrote in part A. So even if you left part A blank, you can still get for the full points for part B, because you just have to assume that get column works. And you have to use all three of these appropriately to receive full credit. So let's get started. Public static boolean is Latin int 2D array square. Okay, so we're going to be checking for three things. The first row has no duplicate values. All values in the first row must appear in each row, and all values in the first row must appear in each column. So we're going to create three booleans for this. Boolean first row, boolean each row, that's why, okay, boolean each column. Ugh. Now there's a lot of different ways to write this this method because it's kind of difficult. So this way might be less efficient than some other ways you've seen. So the first thing we're going to do is set first row equal to the value, equal to whether the first row of square has duplicates in it. So that's what this first row means. First row is going to be whether the first row contains duplicates. Each row is going to be whether the first row has all the values from, each row has all the values from first row, and each column is going to be whether each column has the values from first column. So we're going to check now, contains duplicates, and we're going to pass in square 0. What is square 0? Well, square 0 is just the first row of this 2D array square. So that's what we're going to give to first row. Then we're going to say, we're going to create a counter. Int counter equals 0. And we're going to create a counter because we need to loop through the rows of the square. And we're going to use a while loop. If we were using a for loop, we wouldn't need to create this counter separately. But we'll use a while loop saying while each row is true and the counter is less than square 0 dot length, which is the length of the first row. So, okay. So, while that's true, if not has all values square 0 square counter. Okay. So what's going on here? Sorry, whoops. Let's finish this. Okay. Each row equals false. So what's going on here? So we're going to check, does this array square counter, so that's the row on this, that's the row at index of counter, does this contain all the values from square 0, which is that first row? If that's true, then we're going to if this is true, then we're going to negate that and say false. So if this whole statement is false, we're going to skip this if, and each row will never be set to false. We're going to do that for each row. Now, if one of them doesn't have it, then this if statement will go through, and each row will be set to false, this Boolean value each row. And then the while loop will check and say, oh, each row is false, let me just stop. So that's how we're going to set each row to the correct the correct value. Now, we're going to reset our counter to 0. And we're going to create another loop. So it says while each column and counter is less than get column. Okay, and this time we're going to give it our 2D array, and we want the column, so we want to get the column, the first column. And so that first column is index 0 in this get column method. So that's what we're doing here. What is going on here? Whoops. Okay. So now we're going to do a check for if not has all values square 0, and get column square counter. Each column equals false. Okay, so what's going on here? So this is very similar to what we did up here. We're going to loop through, oh, gotta not forget these. Okay, so we're going to loop through this square by the column. So column 0, then column 1, then column 2, and we're going to say if this has all the values, this is going to be false, and this if is just going to be skipped. But if it's true, then each column is going to be set to false, and that's going to end this while loop. So now we've got each column initialized to the correct Boolean value, each row initialized to the correct Boolean value, and first row initialized, not initialized, I guess, set to the correct Boolean value. So now all we have to do is simply return whether all three of these are true. And how do we do that? We just need to say return first row and each row and each column. And that's all we need to do for this, and that's all we need to do for question 4. So that's the end. Thank you for watching, and I hope this was helpful.